So this is Jeff Hamrick at Rhodes College, and I am going to talk about how you can use Fathom's automated hypothesis testing features and confidence interval construction features to avoid either using a randomization procedure in Fathom or a hand calculation with Mathematica. So to execute a hypothesis test in Fathom directly, without using a randomization procedure, grab one of these test icons right here. It's the scale, and move it down. The testing box is empty right now. Since I'm working with this data from the Coke Pepsi taste test from my section of Math 111, I'm going to toggle this menu to test proportion. I'm going to test a single proportion. Now I find it much easier to use the hypothesis testing functionality in Fathom if I right-click on this box and eliminate this verbose attribute here. Fathom basically will provide us with a lengthy explanation and interpretation of the hypothesis test that's being run. I find it a little confusing, a little bit too much. It's useful though because it tells us, for example, whether or not Fathom is using the normal approximation or is using an exact binomial calculation when it does a test on a single proportion, but again, in general, I prefer to shut off this verbose attribute. Okay, this is simpler, cleaner output that I like better. So Fathom wants an attribute. The attribute is currently unassigned. I'm going to drag over this attribute called tastings, and I see that I have a null hypothesis that the population proportion of correct tastings is 1/2. Now you'll recall that in class this was not the null hypothesized value we tested against. Instead, we tested against 1/3. You can't put 1/3. You have to put the decimal representation of 1/3 or approximately that representation into Fathom. And we're done, basically. Here's the p-value. You can interpret it as you normally would. Fathom reports the measure as taken with respect to the original set of data as well. This p-value will, of course, be different than the p-value you might get from a randomization distribution or a hand calculation with Mathematica. Now, the next thing that we want to make sure we can do with Fathom is to construct a confidence interval directly using Fathom's built-in functionality. So to do that, you take this arrow over here, the ruler with the arrows, and you drag this box down, and it's empty initially as well. We want to create a confidence interval for a single proportion. So that's this option right here. Okay. Once again, this is a sort of verbose representation of the output. I'm going to shut that off and work with a cleaner, simpler, and admittedly sparser output. We need to drag over an attribute. This is the attribute I'm going to drag over. Okay. And I'm going to just change the confidence interval immediately from 95%, the default. Here's the lower bound, here's the upper bound, by the way. I'm going to change the confidence level from 95% to, let's say, 70%. Fathom updates it immediately, so it's a quite convenient way to get confidence intervals out of Fathom directly. Every place in these two boxes where you see blue, there's an option that you can change. So for example, right now this hypothesis test is being run in a two-sided fashion. Recall that we didn't run the hypothesis test this way in class. We actually ran a one-tailed test. And so that changes the result, obviously, but you change that by toggling on any of these blue-colored bits of font. So we're running a hypothesis test on the proportion of correct Coke Pepsi taste testings and building a confidence interval for that same thing. But for example, if we wanted to build a confidence interval for the true proportion of incorrect Coke Pepsi taste test, we would click on this and switch correct to incorrect. Okay? So that's how you run hypothesis tests on single proportions and build confidence intervals on single proportions in Fathom.